wanted to feature one of the organizations here in Georgia, and in particularly in Atlanta, who is doing a lot to support FinTech, both from the startups up through the established players like Worldpay and others. So I'm going to run a short video here and introduce what the Metro Atlanta Chamber is doing here in Atlanta with FinTech.
Sure, I think that's one of the unique things about Atlanta and the market here in Georgia. FinTech has so many layers to it, and what the consumer sees, whether you're swiping the card and you see that NCR terminal or that Ingenico terminal, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that powers that, the rails that really run payments. We have so much of that growth here in Atlanta, and it's nice to not be a one-horse town when you have the depth of the innovation and the design in all of those layers. It really helps keep an economy moving, and that's what's really helped bolster the overall FinTech industry here. People have had Georgia and Atlanta on their radar screen for a long time. It's just taken this new wave of investment and exits and attention from this year's investment forums that have happened here. That really focused on FinTech, to trade missions, to all of the news that's being made by companies moving in town or moving to town, has really, I think, heightened people's awareness when it comes to the capital opportunities here. Oh, it's a great partnership. I mean, we've been partners with TAG, for as long as I can remember. To have such a major statewide organization like TAG, and to have a chamber that's really focused on our core industry clusters, we found some great verticals to work on, whether it's mobility, FinTech, cyber. And I think this 2016 is going to be really exciting for us with the FinTech Task Force and continuing to work with the FinTech Society at TAG and bringing in ATPC and really creating this kind of triumvirate of taking FinTech to the next level.
So it's been fun to work with the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and some of you may recall that late last year they announced a FinTech task force along with the mayor. And so we're excited about what that's going to do to increase government support here in the metro area for FinTech. So we're going to begin our first panel, and this is a really scintillating topic, the evolution of acquiring. That was a joke. So we're going to have a couple of panelists and a very strong moderator who knows the space. I tried to explain to my daughter, my 8-year-old, what is acquiring? And she just looked at me like, I don't get it. And it really boiled down to, we help people use a credit card or a debit card so that they can pay for their pizza, right? They can pay for their haircut. And then the restaurant or the salon gets their money. And she got that. So that's all it boils down to. It's movement of money. And that's what a lot of what we're going to talk about today, the security around it, the business models around it, and really how it's evolving. And so I want to introduce to you our first moderator, Jason Oxman. He is the CEO of the ETA. Many of you have probably sat through different sessions that he has presented and moderated at. He's led the organization since 2012 through significant transformation and really representing many of the companies in the room on Capitol Hill. You may know that he's a lawyer. You may know that he had clerked at the Supreme Court. You may not know that he actually is a former broadcast journalist. So very interesting combination of talents. I'm sure he's going to keep us really occupied. And so please welcome Jason.
Thank you so much. You probably won't be surprised to hear the broadcast journalism career was actually in radio because I have a great face for it. Thanks, Sarah. I am so honored to be here with you. It's great to be back in Atlanta, great to be here with TAG. I've got 4 great panelists who I'm going to introduce and are going to come up in just a minute to join me here on stage for what is, without any sarcasm, a scintillating conversation, guaranteed, about the future of acquiring. So you all are probably familiar with ETA. ETA is the trade association of the payments industry. We've been around for about 26 years. And one of the reasons that this conversation today is going to be so interesting is because the definition of the payments industry has changed so significantly in the last couple of years in a very positive way because of a very positive reaction by our industry to the disruptive innovation that Haskell was talking so interestingly about earlier today. You know, the payments industry has been around for a long time. The credit card dates back to the 1950s, and some of the credit card networks have been around for even longer than that. American Express, as you all know, actually started as a mail delivery company and has transformed itself over the decades. Why is our industry reacting so favorably to disruptive innovation? Or put another way, why is this conference focused on FinTech in Atlanta, Georgia, the heart of the acquiring industry? You all know that 70% of the nation's credit and debit card transactions flow through Georgia companies, right? You all know that statistic. Why are we having a FinTech conference that's not titled How to Kill FinTech on behalf of the acquiring industry? The reason for that is quite simple. Our industry takes a very different and I think very positive approach to disruptive innovation than almost any incumbent industry that you can name across history. You all remember Grokster and Napster, the first online music sites that started up? You remember those? The precursors way before iTunes? What did the record labels do when Grokster and Napster first came out? You know, the incumbents in the music business. Well, they went all the way to the Supreme Court to try to kill them. What did the movie studios do when the VCR first came out? You remember the Sony Betamax when that first came out in the early 1970s? What Hollywood did? Again, went all the way to the Supreme Court to try to kill it. John Philip Sousa, you know John Philip Sousa, the composer, everybody's favorite marches came from Sousa. You know, he took a break from composing to become a lobbyist, which is actually a good thing. Lobbyists are people too, as you may have heard. Why did he take a break from composing to become a lobbyist? He went to lobby Congress in support of legislation that would kill the player piano. This is in the early 1900s. Why did he care about the player piano? Because he made his money selling sheet music, and he was worried the player piano was going to kill his business. You can pick any industry across history, any incumbent industry, and the reaction of the incumbent industry when disruptive innovation comes out is to try to kill it. Ask the buggy whip industry what they did when the automobile came out. So all that to say, our industry has a very good story to tell. And you can see it in the history of ETA itself as an organization. We're the nonprofit trade association of the payments industry. We have more than 500 member companies. And of course, those member companies are the nation's largest acquirers and ISOs and processors. All of you in this room, all the great Atlanta companies that have been powering our industry for decades. But it's also all the other companies that Haskell was talking about this morning. All the disruptive tech companies he was talking about getting into payments are all members. Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, AT&T, and Verizon. Why are all these companies and many more great tech companies now calling themselves payments companies? Because this is a great industry. And why are all of us in the acquiring industry becoming partners with those companies instead of trying to kill them? Because we know that as an industry, we benefit from electronic payments. We benefit from the growth of electronic payments. More traffic on the network is good for all of us. We don't care whether that comes onto the network by a plastic card with a magnetic stripe on the back of it, or a watch, or a phone, or a chip in my head. All we care about is those transactions or electronic transactions. Creates great opportunities for all of us. So what we're going to talk about over the course of the next hour is how the acquiring industry is not only embracing this disruptive innovation in a positive way, but what we're doing, what the business opportunities we see in the industry, and how FinTech companies, the more than 2,000 that the Angel List says are FinTech startups in this country today, what opportunities they have to become partners with the acquirers of today, or in many cases, acquisition targets of the acquirers of today. So let me introduce our panelists, invite them to come up on stage, and I'll set the stage with a little bit of industry statistics, because I know you all love those, and then we'll have a great conversation. So as everybody's walking up, let me introduce you to Frank, well, walking up and walking by me, Frank Young, who's the SVP from Global Payments. He has some great experience joining Global Payments from Google, so knows a little bit about disruptive innovation. Go ahead, we can sit all the way down at the end, or right there, that's fine too. You can sit wherever you'd like. How about that? Just sit.
Already out of control.
Steve Karp is president of the small business unit of Worldpay, great company headquartered right here in Atlanta. Well, global company, Worldpay US, headquartered right here in Atlanta. Next to Steve is Wally Mlynarski, who is the SVP of Elavon, another great global company with its headquarters here in the US, here in Atlanta. And then Manning Smith is Director of Corporate Strategy for TSYS. So welcome to the four of you. And let me set the stage for our conversation by reminding you of something that I like to talk about when I hear from press or merchants or consumers about how tired they are of hearing that this is the year of mobile payments. No, next year is the year of mobile payments. Last year was kind of year zero, this is year one. Oh, and Bitcoin, this year is the year of Bitcoin. All this disruptive technology that's taking place, everyone says, oh, it's not happening fast enough, consumers aren't adopting it fast enough, consumers still want to use their plastic cards. I think it's helpful to put it in the context over time. It takes a while for new technology to be adopted. And you can go back over time and look at the statistics and look at the numbers about how long it takes for technology to be adopted. And what this chart shows is technologies over time. The green line is how long it took to get to 25% penetration, and then the blue line adds in how long it took to get to 50% penetration. So obviously over time it's getting shorter. There's no question about it. But even if we look at technologies today, I think it's important to realize that the disruption takes a while. Online commerce is a great example. The commercial use restriction was lifted on the internet in when? 1995, right? So 21 years ago. And everyone thinks, oh, wow, we've really exploded online commerce. Brick and mortar retail is dead. Well, we just passed the 10% mark of commerce being online versus brick and mortar last year. So it took 20 years to get to 10%. The smartphone, we all think the smartphone is ubiquitous. You know, the smartphone was invented before the iPhone, but even if we count the introduction of the iPhone as the debut of the smartphone, that was 9 years ago, and 64% of Americans have a smartphone today. So it took 9 years to get to 64% penetration. Technology takes time, whether it's consumer technology or FinTech technology. So I think it's important to remember that context because you'll get a lot of questions about how, oh, there's all this great stuff we're talking about, nobody's using it. Well, it takes time to get to market penetration. Particularly in our industry is a great industry, right? So it's important to remember one very important thing. Payments is hard. It's a hard business. We move a lot of transactions over our networks every day, every year. 80 billion card transactions in the US in 2015. That's 2,600 transactions that our industry processes every second. So when you're talking about disruptive innovation, remember, we're moving a lot of stuff. It's important stuff. The US market, as you know, $5 trillion our industry processed in 2015. That's expected to go over $6 trillion, close to $7 trillion by the end of 2016. 70% of all transactions at retail are processed electronically. So that $5 trillion that we processed in 2015 includes 70% of all purchases that consumers made in person and online. Again, I put these numbers out there to make sure you understand the context of what a huge, massive industry we're talking about and how disrupting that industry for small players and large players alike is a significant undertaking. So we're a dynamic and evolving industry. You heard about it this morning. You're going to hear about it more with a lot of great startups that TAG has brought here today. 800 global investment and acquisition deals and payments in 2015, 395 of those, so about half of them, were in the US alone. The average deal price, $90 million. Great for our industry, terrible if you're running a trade association because you lose members. We lost 21 ETA member companies to acquisitions last year alone. And I'm not going to point fingers, but these guys were responsible for 5 of them collectively. So thanks very much for that. Great for those startups, not great for a trade association. But it does show the volume of deals. It's increasing in 2016. We've seen a lot happen just in the month of January thus far, and we expect that to continue. So where is this all happening in FinTech? Well, 25% of the M&A activity is in those 4 categories. And that's what we're going to talk about today, mostly on this panel and throughout the day. Cryptocurrency, mobile payments, software as a service, security, the areas that our industry is really focusing heavily on, that's not surprisingly where most of the M&A activity in our industry is happening as well. Now, our industry is very focused on a couple of things that I want to mention before we get into the panel. One, of course, is safety and security. We all know that merchants and consumers rely on our industry to protect their information, and we know that cyber criminals, to paraphrase Willie Sutton, are going after our industry because that's where all the money is. And we know that for consumers and merchants, confidence and faith in the payment system is everything. If they lose that confidence, lose that faith, we know that they're not going to use our products and services as much. So we are laser-like focused on deploying safer payments technology. And so as a result of the upgrades that we're making, we're focused on areas where, of course, that safety and security is most threatened. Again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The single largest source of card fraud today in the US in stores is counterfeit card fraud. Followed, that's in stores. So half of all fraud is retail, half of all fraud is online. Within the retail category, the largest category of fraud is counterfeit card fraud. That's why we're doing the EMV migration that you've heard so much about. And the EMV migration, which we all love to talk about and continues apace throughout 2016, started in earnest in October of 2015, is addressing a lot of fraud, but it's not addressing everything. We know that card fraud is going to continue to be an issue. It's going to continue to be a problem over the course of 2016. The model that we know outside the US where the EMV migration has already taken place, that card fraud will move from brick and mortar stores, as counterfeit cards can't be used anymore because of the chips in cards, to online. So if you look at where card fraud has been for the last few years and you look at projections for the next couple of years, you'll see a migration away from counterfeit card fraud, that's the dark blue on the bottom of each of those stacks, and toward online fraud, that's the green in the middle of the stacks. Lost and stolen is the top, that remains pretty constant. So we're looking for that, and we're looking to deploy security solutions. That's a very important focus, and you're seeing a lot of FinTech activity, and you see a lot of companies out here in the ballroom showing technologies that focus on security because it's so important. So the EMV migration continues. There are more than 600 million EMV cards in market already. There will be 617 million more deployed this year. The nation's top merchants have upgraded already. We know that 50% of the 500 largest merchants in the country are already upgraded and are reporting chip card activity. We have a lot more to do. There are 8 million merchants in the US that need to upgrade overall, and we will get there eventually. So there are the numbers right there that I fortunately got right before I switched over to the slide. We just did a consumer survey that we are going to release shortly. We haven't put it out yet, that showed that 70% of Americans have at least one chip card in their wallet already. So we're getting there, and you see the large retailers are reporting chip activity as well. So what's the future of security? It's biometrics. We all use our phones now and are increasingly using our phones to pay. That's very important. Consumers like it. In fact, when we ask consumers the #1 reason why they don't use their phones to pay, it's because they think they aren't as secure as those plastic cards with mag stripes on the back. We all know that's not true, but we have a better education story to do in order to convince consumers that security is something that we are focused on relentlessly as an industry. I mentioned this early, the mobile internet. This is why we think that mobile payments are such an important driver of the future of the FinTech and payments industry overall. Consumers have smartphones in their pockets. That number is increasing, those smartphones. It's hard to buy a mobile phone that's not a smartphone today. And with the deployment of Samsung Pay and Apple Pay, Android Pay, MCX's currency coming up, there are a lot of options for consumers on the phone, and a lot of consumers are starting to use them. So let's get into our panel now, and I've been asked to explain to you how this poll works. Speaking of mobile devices, everybody, even if you don't have a smartphone, you do have texting capability. So the first question that you're asked to address, and you will see real-time results on the screen. I'm going to come over here and join our panelists. What steps should the industry take to embrace innovation and respond to the rise of new competitors? You have options on how to vote there. Do nothing. That's You text your vote to that phone number there, 650-600-9016, or you can go online to that website. And those are your 4 choices. You text your vote by texting one of those 4 numbers to that 650 number. Do nothing, stay the course, change strategy to match disruptors, M&A, acquire the smaller players, or find other options. So go ahead and submit your vote. And while we submit those votes, let me come over here and join our panel and start the discussion. And I think what you have arrayed before you are a number of companies that have done most of those things that you have the option to vote for, except do nothing. And in that sense, I think it's great to see how the acquiring industry has responded to FinTech. So I want to start off and ask our panelists, and Frank, I'll start with you. Philosophically, what has been the corporate response? Take us inside the senior team meetings with Jeff Sloan when you talk about all the disruptive innovation that's happening in FinTech. What's the, let's start with the global payments philosophy about FinTech.
So it's a great question. It's fairly broad in its scope because of the global footprint that we cover. But I think a couple of the elements are the approach to philosophy, the approach to innovation. So we like to, we're walking the halls and we're encouraging people to think big, but start small and scale fast. That philosophically is the approach that we try to take. The problem as an acquirer is you've got to be pretty smart about the bets that you're making that are going to be ultimately integrated into the core infrastructure. Because it's operating at such scale, it's very difficult to bet the company bets on innovation that don't disrupt that engine. And so the approach we're taking is around the world, our global footprint, we like to say the sun never sets on global payments business around the world. We have enough markets that are operating almost independently in some regard, but also collectively as part of the organization, where we can test different things in different markets. And where we find success, we then look to export them to other parts of the world. And we've communicated that to investors as one of the key differentiators of what we're doing. So that really takes more of a portfolio approach to innovation. We're not making a bet the company bet on one path versus the other. But when we roll out something like dynamic currency conversion in one market, we can refine it, optimize it, and then look to export it to other markets. The ability to implement something like an installment payment plan integrated into the point of sale to give consumers a choice to not just use a card, but to potentially have an issuer, as an example, underwrite an installment payment. These are innovations we're looking to implement in certain markets, but once we see success, migrate them around the world. So we think that's a much more pragmatic approach, but it hopes to get at some of the trends that we discussed earlier.
Steve, Worldpay obviously has a global footprint as well, and congratulations on the IPO, by the way. Your focus is on small business, so I'm curious to hear kind of Worldpay's overall approach, but how does all of this disruptive FinTech work its way down to your small business portfolio? Because these are companies that are trying to focus on making payroll for the month and not necessarily on the next form of disruptive innovation.
Absolutely, that's a great question. And if I could just open with 2 quick comments. One is I've never felt so uncomfortable wearing a pair of jeans to a FinTech event, so thank you for all contributing to my nervousness about that. I'll get over it. Secondly, we did just go public. This is actually probably the largest event I've spoken at since we've gone public, and it's really comforting to know I was so entrusted with the responsibility that our general counsel is sitting right there with a kill switch to my mic. So, for the love of God, please, we're all on social media, please do not be tweeting out, Karp said this, Karp said that, at Worldpay, or hashtag Worldpay, or however that works. So, anyways, you're back to the question at hand. We are an SMB, so small and medium-sized business focused player here in the US. We have about 190,000 merchants that we process for. And kind of where this all translates back to that guy who owns, one restaurant or the pizza shop on the corner, who's frankly more worried about burning the pizza in the oven than he is about, can I accept, all these 6 different kinds of wallets or this or that. The challenge for a small business owner in the US marketplace is the range of options and the technology available at the point of sale for that individual owner, whether he has 1 store, 2 stores, or even 5 stores. 10 years ago, it was, here's a terminal, plug it in, cards swipe, and they work. And I think we generally, up at this panel, we built business process, we built technology, we built sales forces, we built all of the incumbent pieces of it to support, plugging a bunch of terminals into our platform and running transactions. And for merchants or small businesses that got a little bit bigger and more evolved, there was a range of purpose-built hardware and software solutions, Micros, Aloha, kind of the usual suspects when you walk into a restaurant or bar or wherever, that were pretty expensive but much more powerful, could manage business process, could help support workflow integration and inventorying and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of been the world that up until a few years ago was really the binary set of options that most small businesses had now. I don't care what kind of merchant you are. So if you own a yoga studio, or we have customers in California that are wineries, there are probably 50 people writing software specifically for your business to solve your unique business problems. So if you own a winery and you sell direct to consumers, there are a very specific set of business challenges you have. So somebody's writing software to enable that, and somewhere along the way, that software vendor recognizes, well, I got to build payments in this. So long story short, small businesses have just probably for many of them, a mind-bogglingly wide range of low-cost, really powerful, really flexible solutions, almost to a point where it's a bit overwhelming and paralyzing. I think some of them are just saying, you know what, I'm just going to stick with a terminal for a while because I get it, it works. It actually is a easier path to EMV in some ways. So long-winded answer to your question.
No, and I didn't hear any forward-looking statements in there whatsoever. Yeah. So well done.
I'm wearing my blazer has stripes, but they're the kind of stripes I look good in, so I'm going to stick to that.
That's great. Wally, you're the only guy up here who actually has innovation in your title. So the pressure's on. Yes. For your response here. I want to hear about Elavon's philosophy toward innovation, but I also want to hear a little bit about the Grove, which you were responsible for before moving into your current SVP role, which was kind of the innovation hub within Elavon. What was it that led to that creation, and how did that help chart Elavon's innovation pathway?
Well, it's all good things. You're looking for a catalyst to help drive that business model or at least business investment that you're going to move forward with. And the catalyst for us was mobile, and it wasn't mobile alone to drive the Grove or the creation of the Grove. So as we looked back in 2011 and saw the infiltration of all these mobile providers coming into our space and the death of all the acquirers via Square and where we'll be at in the next future, we took a step back and said, how do we act more like the people that we're threatened by or appear to be threatened by? And in doing so, we said we don't need to just act like them, we need to partner with them as well. So as you mentioned previously, the payments ecosystem is one of co-opetition. So we all up here partner in one way or another as well, which you don't really see in many other industries. So when we look at the new innovators, the D bucket, we look to partner with them as well. So with the Grove, we created our own innovation department focused on agile development, bringing software developers, user experience developers, very similar to what a startup would do, and get them started, start building tech to help us innovate and partner with other startups that are out there in the business. So we partner with tablet-based point-of-sale providers, created our own mobile-based solutions, SDKs, invested in loyalty and growth and offers there as well. And as we built that discipline, we started to interact and understand more of how people are attacking the space. So in doing so, that helped drive innovation and culture within our business as well, and is now spreading to other parts of our business as well, and really driving the next innovation for Elavon as we come to market globally.
Manning, you focus on corporate strategy at TSYS, which is a great classic processor. You have a great acquiring business, great issuing business. You are single-handedly responsible for at least 2 or 3 of our member attrition at ETA, including TSYS, which you just announced a couple weeks ago, NetSpend, which you picked up last year. Tell me a little bit about, as far as corporate strategy of TSYS, what the innovation philosophy is, and how the acquisition strategy plays into that as part of your analysis of the FinTech market.
Yeah, absolutely. Innovation and really evolving with it is very important to TSYS, especially in the merchant segment. I mean, we have the merchant segment probably has the most rapid advancement of technology kind of bombarding it in the payment space. So it's not a matter of pushing back on it. It's a matter of accepting it. What we really have to debate on is whether we want to develop things internally to try to match these competitors, partner with them, or as you alluded to, go out and buy them if it's the right company. So that's really what we focus on. And it's important because innovation and technology changes in merchant are really changing our business model from a strategic standpoint. I think we alluded to it in one of the earlier presentations. In 5 years, a lot of things will look very differently. So we're always trying to make sure that we are integrating with software providers, providing multi-channel and omni-commerce solutions so that we can position ourselves for really how the market and the merchant acquiring segment is going to move forward in the next 5 to 10 years.
Right. I want to talk about some of the big tech players, and Frank, obviously you're a logical place to start, having spent some time at Google. I mentioned, and Haskell talked about it as well, there are a significant number of very large technology companies that are in the payments business now. Google, obviously, was actually one of the first out of the gate with the first iteration of Google Wallet. Now Android Pay is out there. We know that Apple obviously has partnered with a huge number of card networks, banks, processors, acquirers, for the successful launch of Apple Pay. We know that PayPal is changing up its suite of product offerings. We have MCX with currency. So all of these great technology companies looking to partner with us in the traditional acquiring space. So Frank, let's start with your experience at Google and give us a little insight into how these companies view us in the legacy payments industry. And are these companies looking forward? Are they friend or foe as we all try to continue doing our business?
Yeah, so it's a big question. A little bit of context about me. I was immersed in the FinTech community in Atlanta for about 18 years before I moved to the West Coast for 4. And I thought at the time that software was eating our business. Some of you may have heard that term, and if I wanted to continue in FinTech, the West Coast was the place to be. Spending 4 years there, what I learned was that change, innovation, really happens at the point of interaction between the consumer and the merchant. And while a mobile device may be that new form of interaction, the ability to influence the transaction really relies on everybody sitting here. And so I would venture to guess that anybody in a large-scale payment fintech position today, many of you in this room have probably been approached by one of these big West Coast companies to try to figure out how you could work together to implement something. I'm sure Apple has reached out for Apple Pay, Android Pay. With Android, PayPal has probably walked many of the halls of your organizations. PayPal aside, some of the other innovators, I would venture to guess that you left that meeting saying they don't have a clue around how payments actually work. And it was probably a very large effort for you to try to educate kind of what happens at the coalface. And so I think what they do really, really well is they isolate innovation and they launch and they iterate. And what I was always struck by when I was inside Google was an almost naive perspective amongst very young, bright, incredibly intelligent engineers that the innovation that they were attempting to launch was either unworkable or not consistent with the way that we all operate our business every day. And so what I find is that they are great at building. And so the analogy in my mind at Google, I would always say, is they would attempt to start building the skyscraper. They'd get to about the 80th floor, they'd tear it down and build it again, tear it down and build it again. And every rebuild had an entirely different engineering team and product team trying to figure out a new way to go at it. The beauty of them is they can afford to do that. The problem for us, back to the point about ingesting innovations into our scalable infrastructure, makes it impossible for us to implement some of these innovations without disrupting the core engines that we're operating. And so there's this really, really interesting dynamic between the new innovators on the West Coast and the folks who know and live and breathe payments at scale every day, many of which are here. I think over time we'll continue to push and push and push. But I don't imagine a really significant breakthrough occurring until we can figure out how to meld those two models together. So their flavor of innovation is very messy. Many of you have probably leaned into some of these innovations, made considerable investments, only to realize that they change course, their product takes a pivot or a shift. Hopefully there's a few of you smiling because you've lived through those things. But what we have to do is make sure that we continue to keep the millions or billions of transactions that we're processing every day moving at a high level of assurance, a high level of security, and ultimately don't turn the apple cart up too much. So that dynamic is incredible, and it was probably the reason I moved back, because I want to continue to innovate. I see the fact that the companies represented here are really the entities that are going to ultimately decide on what type of innovation and what pace of innovation occurs, because we're so entrenched in the infrastructure. And so hopefully that sheds some light on how things get done and adds a little sense of pragmatism about what's coming out of the West Coast.
Steve, what's your take on these technology companies becoming payments companies?
Yeah,
and,
so our perspective, we have the benefit of maybe having a little bit different perspective by virtue of the fact that Worldpay Group, which is the larger public entity of which Worldpay US is a division, we are the largest global e-commerce processor in the world, and every single one of the companies you named and many other household names of these, in the weeks leading up to the IPO, I was constantly listening to CNBC on the radio to just understand the market and all that. And they kept talking about the FANG stocks, FANG being an acronym: Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, but all those types of, they all have direct-to-consumer businesses too. Apple has iTunes, right? Microsoft has Xbox and all these sort of things. And so many of those technology companies use us as for their processor around the globe. So the type of dialogue we have with them, I think the entry point for the dialogue is a little bit different. I'm not naive enough to think that it means they're never going to, stamp out their desire to crush us all. But the reality is, they are customers of ours, and I think it has driven maybe a little different perspective. And if nothing else, we know each other better, and that knowledge breeds, I think, a better ability to have, a shared perspective on things.
Wally, should we be concerned that they're going to come crush us all, or are they?
No, I shouldn't. I think they're missing a couple things when you look at what it takes to be in payments. One, as Frank said, this is a business of scale. So nobody makes money until you scale. So if you can't figure out how to scale, then you're going to die in the vine. So a lot of these companies, being consumer focused, know how to scale in a consumer market, but not the buying cycle of what we do today with our customers. A key statistic, and I'm going to get it wrong here, from what Haskell put up, was 50% of that shift of business owners will be millennials by 2020, but they're not today. So they're not buying in the online forums. You don't need to be investing into digitization of your sales process to convert it to completely digital. You need to optimize that sales process, digitize that face-to-face experience, and really drive that relationship to drive sales. And that's what we've built, is those sales forces, the channels, the distribution, and the scale of our platforms to be able to be successful. And I think they missed that kind of secret sauce as they're looking to attack us and originally displace us, but now partner with us. So as they start to figure that out, perhaps their scale, but without us, I don't think they're able to achieve that.
Manning, TSYS was a very early partner with Apple on Apple Pay, helping them with their tokenization products and services, and many of the bank issuers in the country would not be able to accept Apple Pay weren't for your issuing side tokenization services. Can you tell us a little bit about your view on our friends on the West Coast, the Apples and Googles and Microsofts and Intels of the world that are getting into the payment space? Are they going to be friends forever, or should we be looking warily at these new tech entrants?
Well, I think for sure they're friends right now. If you think about what technology and really the digital channel has kind of done to consumers and to the merchant industry, it's changed the way they behave, and it's changed the way they shop. And in turn, from a merchant acquiring perspective, that's created a lot of adjacent markets around that now digital data that sits out there. So I think a lot of these companies are looking to monetize those areas, such as data analysis, loyalty, marketing, advertising. These are things that they do and they do well. They also happen to be things that we don't do well. So I think for now they're friends in that we can partner with them and they can partner with us, so that we each have our respective profit pools that we go after, and to some extent we're able to share in a little bit of those. Now, it does make me slightly nervous that on a whim, I think one of those companies probably has enough cash flow to buy everybody on the stage if they wanted to. But for now, I definitely think they're friends because, I don't know if they have the expertise nor they want to be merchant acquirers. I think they want to go after those adjacent markets that I highlighted. I
think to some degree they've all touched the stove, so they know that it's hot. And again, to the point that, at least for now, I'm sure they all have larger end games. I'm not sure they all want to be payments giants, but this is a part of probably what enables their larger end game.
Yeah. Actually, let me stay with you, Steve, on the next question, because we've talked a little bit about the technology companies. I want to talk about the banks. We heard a lot of interesting survey data this morning about the reaction of financial institutions to technology disruption. And frankly, I thought the most interesting part of it was how consumers view financial institutions in terms of innovation and protecting information and providing valuable services. Steve, your background, you came out of SunTrust, so you know the financial institution world well. What is most interesting to you about bank reactions writ large to disruptive technology? Do you see a change in the acquirer model? We've had a very simple model, a distinction between the issuer side and the acquirer side that's lasted for 40 years. Is that going to break down? What's going on in the bank world?
So I'll pick on one of our peers who isn't on the panel here, right? They're folks who have built their entire go-to-market acquiring model through partnerships with financial institutions. And this isn't to say that we have a large one, and we all have partnerships with banks of various sizes, and it is an absolutely important means to reach the small business customer, because small businesses, while in many ways they think and act like consumers, I think the small business perspective around financial institutions from a trust and the role that bank plays in their life is probably a little bit different than maybe a millennial or an average consumer might be. But going back to my earlier comment about the way that technology is changing for a small business owner, I would argue in the long run, they're going to be less likely to look to a traditional financial institution as a source of, I need stuff to help me run my business. And it isn't just about banking or payments or payroll. It's about, if you're a restaurant, it's about managing reservations and managing inventory and managing, there's software that runs on a lot of restaurant systems to specifically look for fraud from bartenders. Right, so the software that small business owners need is so complex and so vertical specific. I think it's going to be tougher and tougher for banks to continue to maintain their direct relevance in partnering with a small business owner specifically on the acquiring side. Not to say that model's dead; it still has a role. I just think it's going to change over time.
I would take the opposite view on that. I'd actually say, yes, obviously partnering with a lot of bank channels. The bank channel, there's a lot of conversation around the bank channel dying and ultimately switching to direct purchasing and shifting forward. But as we look at the life cycle of all of us as we go through our stages of life, yes, when you look at the PwC affluent 22 to 28-year-olds and what do they think of banks? Well, they said apps, right? Well, the banks are producing those apps and they're creating new experiences to engage with them. So they're not standing still. Then on top of that, as you move through your next stage of life cycle, so out of that, out of college and growth and partying and having fun into the family stage, you see actually a shift over history and time of people actually gravitating back towards banks because they need to go to get a mortgage or they need to engage for other reasons a part of their life cycle. So these small business owners that are transitioning, these young people that are taking over are actually going to go through that life cycle change too, and it's still very strong that where I go to get financial services is to an institution that I trust. So as long as banks can maintain trust, I think they still are a very viable channel going forward, but not the only channel.
Yeah, I think, on this general topic, I think we've touched on probably, in our view, one of the single biggest shifts underway in the acquiring business is the changing nature of distribution. And I think Steve appropriately says, listen, the banks are going to be important for a long period of time. It's not to say they're not going to be a great distribution channel. But you can simply look, and we're often fascinated by, taking the buying decision of a small business or a tech startup as an example. Where in the buying process does the acquirer even come into play? Right, they're choosing perhaps a e-com platform, maybe a shopping cart platform. That shopping cart is recommending a gateway, and the gateway is saying, pick any acquirer you want on the back end. We're certified to all of them. So in that buying decision, where are we? We're kind of well removed from that decision. Years ago, it was they would go to their bank, they'd set up an account, and there would be somebody selling the service. And so that changing nature, we refer to it as tech-led distribution. And it's not just an e-com, it's also in stores. But I think Steve's spot on where he says, small business owners, the pizza guy, right, isn't out looking for payments. He's looking for a table management system or a reservation system or a business management software package. And if it comes with a pre-certified payment plugin, fantastic. But I'm not going to make my decision based on the payment. I'm going to make the decision based on, does this software help me manage my business in a fairly simple way? And so the business is no longer putting bricks on counters. The business today is figuring out a way that we expose our services to be consumed by all the edge services that are being delivered to merchants. I think that's probably the most fundamental shift in the past 5 years in the entire
I think the
space.
reality is that as a narrow function of what we do, which is payment processing, that is moving further and further back in the buying decision, and that's scary in lots of ways. The strategic question that I think we've all answered probably in a little different fashion, and right, strategy has to be informed by your market position and market. In the UK, we're the #1 player, so our strategy is inherently going to be different than in the US, where we have 5% market share. We're number 9 in the industry, but so where the strategy manifests itself is how much further up forward in that value chain do we want to play? Do we go buy the folks that tend to sit up in the front? Do we build it ourselves? And I think everyone's taken, or do we want to concentrate on more of an Intel inside model? And we're okay sitting in the back. We're okay being the focal point and touch point for the merchant, and our role is to power all the people who do all the really smart things up the food chain. The economics become very different. How you go to market's very different. But to kind of sit and say, well, we're the most important thing that a small business buys, that just isn't true anymore.
I think it's the rise of the biggest trend that Frank highlighted there is integrated payments. So how are you attacking to be a part of a bigger solution as you move forward? And that's the payments 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever we want to call it for APIs, SDKs. How are we embedding ourselves inside that buying decision to make sure that we are included in that as we move forward? So.
You guys are all just spending money like drunken sailors to solve that problem.
Well, and I think we should stay on this actually for a second, because this issue, the sales channel issue, is incredibly relevant to everybody in the room. I mean, if we had to talk about the payments industry broadly speaking, there are 2 categories, right? There are people that make things that they want merchants or consumers to purchase. And then there are people that sell things that are looking for those things that other people make to sell to merchants and consumers. And for those that make things, and these are the FinTech companies that have these great new products and services that they want to launch, in the case of the acquiring channel, to merchants, the sales channel question is a big one. Obviously, we see a lot of technology companies partner with the existing sales channel. And I want to ask each of you for your thoughts on how the sales channel is migrating and how you're migrating your view of the sales channel in light of the fact that it's not as simple as it was 25 years ago. 25 years ago, everybody on this stage was selling one thing. That was card acceptance. That's pretty easy. But now, as Steve was talking about, merchants are looking for the inventory management and the location-based offers and the time cards and all these other great services. So how does that influence the analysis that a company that's deployed a great new technology for merchants makes in deciding how the sales channel is best accessed by that product or service? And how do you all decide as executives running those sales channels how you need to tweak your mix of people that are out there selling for you? Can I start with you?
Yeah, so I'll also go back. I think a lot of what Steve's talking about resonates really highly with me.
Except for the drunken sailor comment.
Yeah. I completely missed that one.
I'm waiting for the tweet. I'm waiting for the tweet on that. Karp called global, and they called them a bunch of drunken sailors.
It wasn't too far long ago that you guys acquired Bibit as well, so that was a large acquisition too.
It was.
It's getting heated up here. I was just, I had a really interesting conversation yesterday over lunch with somebody on my team, and we were talking about this concept of the paradox of choice. And Steve, you had mentioned earlier, right? If you look at you take the de novo platform that PwC offers or any of these other services, and you look at the marketing technology landscape, how many companies have taken advantage of the fact that the barriers to entry to start a business have fallen so low. When I was at Google, I had an opportunity to speak to one of these companies that many of us would consider a unicorn today. They had mentioned when the first month they started using AWS as their platform, their bill for AWS was less than $5. Right, so almost, computing power is almost a non-issue anymore. But what that results in is a flood of startups that are all chasing different parts of the value chain. And so take a look at the marketing technology landscape. We all want to move to that higher value added, but how do you choose amongst the literally thousands of startup companies and bring them together in an integrated way that makes sense to the guy that's trying to run a pizza restaurant? It's almost impossible. And so, when you hear people, we were talking at lunch, if your sales team comes back and says, hey, this great thing we're trying to sell to the merchant, they just don't understand the value. They're not seeing the value. I think that's a perfect sign that you've overshot the market. That merchants don't want 250 apps to choose from in this great device that they're going to put on their countertop. We're smart enough to know that there's probably 6 that matter. And so where value is going to shift is into the curation of all that complexity, which is probably not a skill many acquiring organizations have. It takes a design mentality, the ability to curate, the ability to be viewed as the party who's going to stitch together these modular components in the most elegant, simple, streamlined way is really where I think competition is going. And so the salespeople that sell acquiring, I wouldn't necessarily consider the vast majority of them kind of design-oriented curators, but that's what it's going to take. And in fact, to compete in the new world, I like to say there's 2 types of people we should all be out there paying premiums to hire. And that's designers, people with a design mentality, and analytic capabilities, PhDs in big data analytics. I think if you focused on bringing those 2 types of people into your organization, everything else could be competed away and commoditized. But that's where value is shifting, and I think that's the mindset we need to have.
Of all the near-term things, and I would define near-term in our world by, say, the next 2 years, right? Of all the near-term things that I lose the most sleep about and think about the most, it's exactly your question about, right? I have 6 unique sales channels in my world, ranging from the traditional commission-only, field-based employee sellers to 1099 non-employee agents that are selling our solutions, our competitor solutions, to a call center that receives inbound leads off search engine marketing, right? So, and there's 3, so there's 6 of them in total, and understanding the appropriate way to shift the balance of where you're going to put more or less resources over time, because there was no, 5 years ago, there's really 2 channels or 3 channels. Now there's 6 because we're going after a different combination of direct and indirect. And the implications for kind of where you land on those decisions just cascades all the way through the organization, because, right, if you're going to have a large direct sales force, then what technology do you put in their hands to enable them? What kind of CRM do you have? How do you have a commission incentive structure that appropriately recognizes that you have field sellers and they may work with partners in the field to generate leads, and it just is so much more complicated. It's this big Rubik's Cube of Salesforce, and right, you're trying to do all those things while not dramatically kill one off too quickly, because then you're choking off earnings and revenue that matter right now. So it's just that is a huge question. And, I think we're all going to get to different answers that'll be informed by our broader strategy on what the right balance is.
At Elavon, we look at ourselves as a channel of channels. So depending by market, those channels may be different. Starting back with the generation of ETA with ISOs and how we're actually supporting those ISOs, selling terminals to ISOs or rinse and repeating to banks has now evolved, as you stated, with inventory management, order ahead, online websites, whatever that new complex sale that's happening there. So that has really inundated the sales force with so much information and how they actually consume and make that pitch. So we've been focused on, depending on the channel, how do we give them tools to better present or better sell or focus? And there's obviously others in the industry that have verticalized sales forces that focus on there to really enable them to not only present, demo, video, show the value there, but also convert and close the sale at the point of purchase, which for us is selling to our customers, the merchants. And that may be different in a bank channel versus an ISO and MSP or through alternative distribution channel like Costco or Verizon for us, or do more different displays, versus the new channel that's happening with ISVs and VARs, and how we're actually partnering with them to really bring in new traffic and partnering with them. So looking at each sales cycle, you have to invest in different ways, but it's the digitization of that face-to-face sale, not pushing it to online to pass the decision elsewhere. You got to convert. It's all about conversion.
Yeah, distribution is undoubtedly one of the most important things that we focus from a strategic standpoint in the merchant segment, and it's one of the biggest things for merchant acquiring, and it's changing, as you noted. A lot of merchants now care more about solutions that help them run their business, solutions that help them attract new customers, grow their business, as opposed to, accept electronic payments. So what we've really focused on at TSYS is technology-led distribution. We've done it in-house, and I think in this past fourth quarter, 25% of our new SMB ads came through that integrated payments channel. Part of what we found so attractive about TransFirst is approximately 30% of their net revenue is generated from integrated payments partner. And it's definitely a difficult sale to make in-house with your existing team, and that's why we've really focused on partnering with players who can help make that pitch and then toss referrals over the wall for us to sell in merchant solutions that have been integrated into their offering. But it's critically important to do that, because what we're all kind of talking about is what merchants value has really changed. I think merchant acquiring is a great value proposition. Being able to accept electronic payments is great, but it hasn't really changed over a number of years. So it's kind of expected from a merchant, and now it's being expected at a lower and lower price. So they've shifted their allegiance when they want to make a change at a point of sale to looking at software vendors or value-added resellers. And so in partnering with those people, we still get to maintain relevancy. But what's tricky about that is, if you think about it, similar to ISOs 10 years ago, some of these partners that we're all using are going to get big enough, and they're going to continue to eat in the economics that we currently capture today. So we really have to think about how we want to change our distribution model, and quite frankly, our business model, into the future, where sometimes we partner with them, sometimes in select vertical markets we decide to own our own software companies, whether we buy it or develop it in-house. And sometimes you can go as far as, Heartland does. I mean, they are an ISV in certain areas. Heck, they even have a payroll company. So, we're all moving beyond merchant acquiring to really business solutions to the merchant. And I think that's showing itself up right now in distribution.
I want to take advantage of having this panel here to ask one last question of them. I'm going to ask each of them to tell all of us what one thing they're most excited about in 2016, whether it's a company that we should all be watching, whether it's an industry trend we should all be looking at, whether it's a technology. What are you most excited about? And the context for that that I'll leave you with is ETA has a great partnership with PwC, and particularly their strategy and arm. We do research every year together, and we release an annual report at our trade show, Transact, which is coming up in April in Las Vegas. Hope to see you all there. And the last study we did together is an acquirer study. So we interview the entire acquiring and ISO channel. And one of the most interesting questions, I think, in that survey is, what is your reaction as a company to the disruptive FinTech innovation that's taking place? And then the options are you going to buy a company? Are you going to start your own internal unit to launch a new technology? Are you just going to watch and see what happens? And the answer we got last year in 2015, it keeps going up every year. About 93% of respondents said they were either going to acquire a company or start an internal capability to address the FinTech disruption area that's affecting their business the most. So something to keep an eye on as we continue to partner together and help explore and encourage the FinTech deployment that's taking place. So to each of our panelists, what's the one thing you would counsel everybody to look at? One company, one technology, one area of innovation that you're most excited about in 2016? Right?
Wow, to pick one is going to be a challenge, but I'll be honest to the question.
All right.
Talking earlier about the year of mobile, right? I think one of the most underappreciated things, I've read a lot of the kind of prognostications for 2016, and how few of them say that by the end of 2016, the entire planet will be covered by 3 mobile wallet solutions for the first time. Samsung Pay, Android Pay, and Apple Pay will extend their capability around the world, and they'll do it by December 2016. The in-store experience is interesting, but the thing we're really, really excited about is the in-app experience, taking the mobile experience and making it so much more seamless and frictionless. If you've ever used Apple Pay for an in-app purchase, it's delightful, right? The ability to avoid having to key in, even a username and password. I mean, PayPal had already moved pretty far along, but putting a username and password into an app to authorize a transaction still had some friction in it. With Apple Pay, buy with Apple Pay, thumbprint authenticate, and you're done. That's a fairly significant advance, and it's now in the process of spreading around the world. The opportunities that presents are pretty phenomenal.
Great. Steve, what's your one thing?
So I think 15 was the year we started to see it. I'm hoping 16 is a better year for it, but around tablet point of sale, where, a little bit to the point that was made earlier, there are dozens and dozens of really elegant, amazingly thought through user experience products and solutions that businesses just don't want to, they won't use. And so it's that intersection of, user design, complexity, power, but delivering in a way that works, and that a small business owner who's got one hand managing the pizza in the oven and another hand trying to collect cash or something from a customer, just harnessing the technology that's available and the really, really smart software folks that design this stuff in a way that we can all bring to market and will work.
Good.
So
Wally, your one thing?
Yeah, I'll answer your difficult question of one with how we actually set priorities as well. So when you ask for a top 5, you actually end up in finding that there's layered goals underneath of that, and you end up with 30. So security is the answer, but security actually evolves from the adoption of EMV, the proliferation of tokenization and end-to-end encryption, P2PE, the issuer-based tokenization that's happened in mobile, and that shift to e-commerce as well as to the card eventually, and how we're actually securing payments at a global economic scale to eliminate and fight that large bucket or pie that you had there, not just from the card replicated fraud state or the lost and stolen, but also in the e-commerce space as well. So security is one that we view very big.
Great. And Manning, last word.
For 2016 and beyond, I think omnicommerce, particularly as it filters down to the SMB space, is going to be the most exciting opportunity or thing that I'd like to look for the most. The digital channels really changed the way people shop. It's driven by mobile. There are multiple channels that people shop in, multiple channels that merchant must accept payments in, and it's up for us acquirers to really blend that together in a seamless fashion, integrate it with other technology, and provide a holistic omni-commerce offering for our merchants and for their end users, the customers.
It's an exciting time in our industry. Please join me in thanking our panelists for that scintillating conversation.
Well, scintillating.
Good stuff, thanks.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
And on behalf of ETA, our thanks to our partners at TAG for the opportunity to be here. Look forward to discussing great FinTech issues over the course of the day. And Sarah, I will turn it back over to you.